so much for that, everyone. Today we're going to talk about GitHub's journey from NIST to PSIRT and how we benchmark our program, and a little bit about how we split from one cert into a CSIRT and a PSIRT. It's a short talk, so we're keeping it very high level. We're going to be looking at 3 different frameworks and the PSIRT program. So look at this as more of an invitation, if anything piques your curiosity, to come find us throughout the conference and dig in to learn more. So definitely welcome conversation and questions as a follow-up. So I am Sara Clements. I am the senior manager for our bug bounty and PSIRT teams at GitHub. And my favorite thing about what I do is using values alignment frameworks to make high-risk decisions. And my co-presenter here is Jeff.
Hey everybody, my name is Jeff. I work in the vuln management program now. I used to work on the bug bounty program and team and moved over just a few weeks ago. My favorite thing is to tackle bugs and vulns at scale, and we're definitely going to talk about that today.
So to give a quick look at what we'll be talking about today, we're first going to look at the program goals that we founded our PSIRT on, as well as a mini history of PSIRT at GitHub via the lens of these 3 different frameworks. And then we'll end with a high-level sample mapping of our current program and kind of how we've aligned it to the first PSIRT services framework. So looking at PSIRT programs, these are the top level sort of pillars that we are that we use to grow and mature the program. So we have maturity, scalability, and sustainability. Maturity is going to be a large part of this focus since we're looking at these frameworks, and the goal was to mature our program. The important thing about having this lens of these 3 pillars is to ensure that any maturity we do is also scalable and sustainable. And by scalable, I mean, we expect ideally GitHub to grow, and so we need to make sure that our program doesn't just keep up, but also stays ahead. Sustainability, probably everyone in this room knows that IR, incident response, not for the faint of heart. Resiliency is incredibly important. And so every maturity benchmark we hit, every step we move forward, we need to make sure that it is sustainable for the people who are actually operating the program. So just to give you a view of our program, again, it's at GitHub, we're following the distributed model. We have a small core team of PSIRTs with a wide-ranging network of stakeholders. So our PSIRT team is largely a coordination function where we delegate, as well as an analytical function. And we have stakeholders across the company that can manage different aspects of our vulnerability management. So now I'm going to go back in time. Before there was a PSIRT, there was just one cert at GitHub. So they handled both corporate incident response as well as product incident response. The IR program, that original cert, was originally founded on the controls set by NIST. So taking a look at these controls, a very simplified version of NIST 800-61. This is where we started from. We had the process and the plan, which was our incident response plan. This is not like a playbook, but it's what all of our playbooks are based off of. If you're on my team, you might not even remember where the plan is because it's just so innate to the way that you work that it's just ingrained in how we work. But we do have it written out. So this is like the most critical part of the really like foundational part of an IR, a PSIRT IR program. Communication covers a really, really broad set of stakeholders for us. That's internal, external, engineers, product owners, legal, users, law enforcement, various international governing bodies. So knowing who they are and how to find them all is a challenge. We keep an internal stakeholder Rolodex at GitHub that helps us keep up to date with our contacts. We also have a service catalog, which helps find product owners for different product areas at GitHub. So that can be really helpful in the heat of a vulnerability and response to be able to just run over to your directory and find the people you need to find. Scope is probably the simplest to explain, but the hardest to actually like build for your organization, or it certainly was for us. At its core, scope is what we cover and when we cover it. But mapping it out can actually prove to be a lot more challenging than it sounds, because it can be a moving target with a growing company. It's a moving target because security is always moving, and resources change. And that can also bring about challenges in how you scope your program. And lastly, staffing, establishing dedicated and trained responders. We're gonna talk a little bit more about that as well. But basically we have the core IR teams and their responsibilities and training. So peeking ahead a little bit at the first PSIRT services framework, a lot of our NIST-derived program fundamentals are a straight one-to-one mapping for the organizational foundations of the PSIRT services framework. What this means is that we started with a really strong foundation to build off of. That foundation is incredibly important. These fundamentals are going to set the tone and the culture of your IR program. They are also a great and necessary opportunity to get leadership buy-in, which is critical during a time of crisis, so that they understand exactly how things are going to go down. So as GitHub grew and expanded, going back to the history of GitHub's PSIRT, we realized it made a lot of sense to split the CERT out into a CSIRT corporate function and a PSIRT product function. Primary reason it came down to was prioritization. It became exceptionally difficult to consider prioritizing resources for corporate and product, and to not end up in a place in the worst of times where it almost feels like a conflict of interest. So as a new PSIRT, we wanted to dive in deeper. We wanted to learn more and build off of what we had started with, which is when we turned to the forum for incident response and security teams. Members here already know, in case you haven't applied yet, though, there is a baseline of maturity that is required to get into FIRST as a member. We had a little bit of work to do before we meet that baseline. And that baseline is defined by the SIM3 framework. So the SIM3 Security Incident Management Maturity Model, because I love spelling out my acronyms, is a 0 to 4 scale to assess the level of maturity of an IR program. Now, this framework is actually geared a lot more towards a CSIRT, a corporate incident response. So it overlapped a lot for where we were at the time that we split off, but we did still have some improvements to make. So using an example, I have my shorthand version of the 0 to 4 scale. Apologies if anybody who worked on SIM3 is here. The staffing, going back to the staffing from the NIST core foundation, looking at this scale, the way we kind of like worked through it is 0, you don't have an IR team. 1, we have dedicated IR ICs. Step 2, we have a minimum dedicated number of ICs documented in our policies and standards. 3, we have a minimum number of dedicated ICs documented, and that document is approved and upheld by our leadership team. And 4, we reassess capacity and staffing needs yearly and update that accordingly with an approval chain. So that's just kind of a quick look at how we approach the SIM3 framework in order to reach that baseline maturity. And this was the great tool that they had to check against it. It took us about a year of pushing forward between crises in order to achieve the baseline where we felt confident submitting our application. And that was thanks to persistence, the wide-reaching coordination skills, and the furious docs writing capability that you would expect from an incident response team. So big shout out to PSIRT, who are, much of the green on this chart is a direct result of their work. So you can see this chart is broken out into 4 different sections. Operational organization, which is that operational foundations, kind of coming back to those foundational principles. The human aspect, resiliency, training, tools. This part was a little more CSIRT focused. I did not fill out this portion of the chart, so don't think that we're at a level 1 here. So processes is the 4th group, and that's the sequence of actions and tools to achieve the desired result of the program. So that is all living and moving part of our maturity. Okay, so we founded an IR program with NIST. We secured this elite membership with FIRST via the SIM3 CSIRT benchmark. So now what about maturing a product security incident response team? And this is where FIRST really comes in because they have an established product security IR specific framework. And we're going to take a look at that framework right here. The framework is laid out here. It includes that organizational foundations at the top, which again aligns very closely to the work we have done with the NIST alignment. Down the center, you have the vulnerability lifecycle in an incident. And you can see each of which has a connection to the stakeholder ecosystem management and the training and education. This framework helped us align really tightly with our bug bounty program. As we divided out from CSIRT, we started to align more closely with bug bounty. This enables our teams to build a more holistic first-party vulnerability management program that is working in tight partnership with our entire engineering org. So from here, I'm going to pass it over to Jeff, who's going to take a look at this framework. We're going to walk through the vulnerability lifecycle here and talk a little bit, again, very high level, about how we approach foundations, stakeholder ecosystem, and training and education for each of these service areas 2 through 5. So, Jeff, take it away.
All right, thanks, Sarah. So our bug bounty program is very unique here at GitHub. It's a fundamental part of our vulnerability lifecycle. Our investments have really paid off. We invested heavy 5 years ago, created a bounty team. We created, revamped our rewards. We have really high rewards and just really gamified security research. And so even today, now we have a very mature and dedicated team working on the bug bounty program for product experts and engage with engineering, IR, and many more. Now let's go to phase 1. So vulnerability discovery, right, is the framework we're mapping to the service area framework that we talked about in the previous slide, right? This is the first phase of vulnerability life cycles. Essentially, we want our stakeholders to have proper ways of reporting their bugs and their vulns to us. We also want internal folks to know where to communicate with us on Slack or whatever medium, right, we want to use. We want external folks to have ways to submit security concerns that maybe they're not sure, should I submit this to the bounty program? Is this just like a personal setup problem? We want to have that set up. And so we have Zendesk, we have email set up, and we have those processes in place. And they're consistent and they're repeatable and durable, which is the goal, right? And lastly, we have security researchers, right, who can submit security issues via our public and our private programs on HackerOne. And when we talk about training and education, we ensure that our discovery stakeholders know how to find and use the intake portals, right? Because if they can't use it and they can't submit things to us properly, then we're not going to get them on time. And so part of the SIM3 maturity effort was RFC 2350. And also for bug bounty, right? Like how do we continuously train and educate ourselves internally and externally on the world that is bounty. And the way we approached that was we would do things that were, public facing, like bug bounty spotlight interviews. We would interview some of our researchers and give them a voice. Like, why do you hack on our program? Why do you like to engage with us? Is it the money? Is it the FaceTime with the GitHub engineers directly? Like, what is it that that you like? And we build off of that. Public facing presence, right? We try to go to conferences, we try to meet our researchers, take them out for lunch, just kind of get to know them and keep them. But also gamifying bug hunting. We rolled out a swag shop that you would only get a swag coupon if you submitted a valid vulnerability, and all of a sudden everyone was like, I want swag, and I can only get it if I find a valid vulnerability. That's like a CTF in itself, and I get money and some swag that only I can get. So that, along with like public disclosures and crediting the researchers, those are ways that we would kind of approach the training and education for discovery. So now we move to second phase, right? The second phase of the vuln lifecycle. The fundamental components of the triage process are we have our bug bounty engineers who assist in tracking the vulns via our automation, which kicks off our SLA for remediation, right? Hey, we've confirmed it's a vuln. Here's all of our information, right? Our engineers are they kind of write up a nice summary, they give all the artifacts, and they kick off the tracking. We have a unified severity guideline and we stick to it and we quote it and we say, hey, this is a medium, you have X number of days, let's get going. And so that, along with PSIRT analysts, right, who are leading the prioritization and the commanding of the incident as the vulnerability is confirmed and action items begin to be tasked, right? How do I start, I have to start commanding this, I have to start shepherding this. And then finally, product engineering, right, is looped into conversations. As soon as we've confirmed a vuln, right? So we have issues, right? We use GitHub to secure GitHub on GitHub. I think I said it right. And so we use GitHub issues, right? And so the vulnerability is confirmed, the engineering team is checking it out. And then finally, they're working and starting to think about the remediation and mitigation efforts. And so we use, like I said earlier, we have our automation, we use, all of our skills independently to kind of shepherd us into the right way, right? Command us into, we have to prioritize this because X, Y, Z, and having an open communication that's very blameless, right? A blameless, communication really helps drive to remediation much faster when it doesn't feel like you're getting hammered for, answered on why the vulnerability exists. And so for training and education for this portion, right, we essentially have, for bug bounty, it's essentially a lot of tone and channeling the GitHub voice, right? The communication between the researcher and the bounty program is different, right, than the communication of first responder and engineering, right? But they are very important in differently. But channeling that voice and making sure that there's a ton of training and documentation so you can consistently communicate, as well as first responder training, right? So you want a lot of documentation, you want a lot of shadowing going on, right? A lot of cross training and knowledge dumps, right? Like, hey, how did you approach this and why? When you were working on this incident, right, which was critical at the time, how did you go for it? How did you go about it? And reverse shadowing, and all of those really play like a key fundamental for the triage phase. And so now we're moving on to the third one. So engineering is pushing out fixed PRs, right, to fix and remediate the issue. Product is involved with any decisions that need to be made, if any, as a result of the vulnerability, right? Bounty engineers are retesting the proof of concepts. They're looking for potential variants, and they're discussing rewards to compensate the finding if applicable, right? Depends on the source, but if it's, a program submission, you leverage prior art, you leverage communication and all the things that are very durable and repeatable. Oops, sorry. Cool, all right, so we are still in remediation. Okay. So yeah, and then we have, GitHub engineering bootcamp. Everyone learns via our bootcamp how to use GitHub to secure GitHub, right? So opening the PRs, opening the issues, like, merging all the GitHub stuff, right? So that's where training and education kind of comes in for just knowing our platform, and also command training, right? Like I said earlier, right, that like shadowing and that like commanding, like all of that is part of the baked into the training. And finally, we have disclosure, right? Which the stakeholder list is long. We listed 3 just for kicks and giggles, but we could have put them all, right? Everyone is important when it comes to the ecosystem of, hey, we're disclosing this, and then everyone goes in and starts reading the comms and I don't like how this is framed. I don't like this, and so, and all of that is legit. They're valid concerns, and as a team, as a company, you have to take them into account. Everyone's perspective is just as important, but you have a mission, and sometimes they're driven by deadlines or driven by certain, foundations like transparency first, right? We want to be transparent. What's the best form of communication to be transparent for this one? Should we do an email to every affected user? Should we do a CVE, a blog post for, wider visibility? Should we just do a change log like we usually do, And you don't make these up on the fly, right? Ideally, and the way we do things, we leverage a lot of prior art, we leverage a lot of prior experience to decide which way to go. And if you're just starting, I would really recommend to just always document as you go on why that happened, because you'll build up, and you become like a historian after a while, and that like really helps decide, all right, we did this, we did a blog post for this type of vuln in the past. And this new one that came in is a little bit, more severe. That's like the baseline. We need to do a blog post at minimum, and that helps kind of make these decisions when everything looks like it's on fire, right? And so using prior art, using lessons learned, and documenting as you go, right? Which sometimes it's hard, right? It's like I'm already in a ton of meetings, I'm already in the incident, like I don't have time to document something, but it does go a long way, right? So documenting your lessons learned, documenting for prior art really goes a long way, along with the GitHub voice, right? Which for us is just leveraging our consistent comms and language. And so finally, a bonus slide for y'all is being able to easily align to these frameworks and incorporate them into our processes, and more importantly, our mission. And it has other perks. It makes audit season a breeze. Since our docs are already using a shared language in the industry with some GitHub voice flair, right? You get wins like this. And yeah, our audit team told us that, and I created a really quick meme generator like a year ago, and I blasted it in the company. I said we crushed it, and we moved on to the next thing. And that's all I have. That's all we have for you today. Any questions? And before that, we want to thank the organizers. Make sure you say thanks. Organizing a conference is really hard. And thank you for coming right before lunch. 5 minutes for questions, if anyone wants.
For the presentation. I have a question. I used to run a bug bounty program in the past, no, I don't. What is your current experience with, for example, people using LLMs and other technology to submit what ends up being noise? What's your current noise to signal ratio, and what are your techniques to optimize it?
In short, it's high, right? Like the noise to signal is definitely high. We are seeing so many people learn about AI as it comes out, and then learning again the next day or week as advancements are made. And there's a lot of buzz around it and a lot of skepticism around AI. So I think that also generates a lot of reports from folks who have expectations that might not be aligned with the actual technology itself. So yeah, we're definitely still, still discovering that as we develop an AI product, right? But we do our best to kind of keep it efficient, and when we identify that there's like a lot of noise coming in about a certain aspect, like I'm sure everyone here has seen hallucinations as a noisemaker, right? We work with our internal teams, both like within security and communications, to think like, well, how do we educate people, right? How do we get out there like what our expectations are in AI, and like what we kind of know is a risk, but that it's worth pushing the technology forward. And so we work both on independent communication with each individual researcher, but at scale, trying to address like that confusion and bring as much clarity as we can into how we develop AI securely, and why certain things might not fall in scope for a program. I hope that, yeah.
So maybe a shameless plug, but my colleague Madison and Tobias at 14:30 in room 1CD are doing a workshop called Vulnerability Poker, Real or AI Fake Vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to that one.
Cool, perfect. All right.
No. I, for one, I am grateful that I am no longer managing a bug bounty program in the year of 2025. So kudos to all of you that are doing it.
Thank you for the question.
Next presentation, thank you for that. My question, you mentioned that you started with NIST before to join first and this first more. You mentioned also SIM3, the self-assessment, which is based on PSIRT, not really research. What challenge did you face from, joining first individual and the system, or you also have to try to adapt with SIM3 based on PSIRT and using it for PSIRT?
Yeah, so we started with NIST, and that's how we built those organizational foundations. The SIM3 tool was part of the application process for FIRST. So that was the tool we used to kind of show where our maturity was. And at that time, we had a separate CSIRT and PSIRT, but we were trying to get in as a whole company, right? So part of the assessment is making sure that your company is ready, not just a single team. And so that was why we use that SIM3, even though it's primarily a CSIRT framework. And NIST was high level, and covered both teams. So for us, it wasn't really so much like, I wouldn't even say we moved off of NIST, we built on top of it, right? And so the PSIRT services framework, the reason we really leaned in there, and if anybody here has not read it, it's very detailed, and it's a really great opportunity, like take the opportunity to look through it. It was a real driver for us to move that application as quickly as we did. We were excited to get here. And I hope that covers your question. It was just more about like getting more product specific in our IR program.
Thank you, yes, that one.
Well, we're at time, but thank you guys so much for coming.